focused on how can we address the income inequality that underpins a lot of these issues we have in society. But it starts with the workers that are there. How do you create wealth for them? How do you actually make them successful so each one of them can thrive?
Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Liberty Ventures podcast. I'm Alexander McCobin, founder and CEO of Liberty Ventures, and am so excited to continue building this ecosystem of like-valued business leaders who care about a free and prosperous future by helping you learn how to be more effective in your business, scale your business in order to scale your impact. And today, I'm joined by my longtime friend, Mike Brady, who I'm really excited to explore a number of topics with that we've been discussing for a while between the two of us and are going to get to share with everyone else today. Now, Mike's background, he's going to go into more, but it's incredibly diverse, starting out as a consultant with PricewaterhouseCoopers in the beginning of his career, but then going on to run some amazing companies like Greyston Bakery, where we met, which we'll talk about, and now serving as co-founder of the Organic Food Incubator and a partner at Shelter Lab and doing incredible work from especially the concept of employee ownership in companies and really being a purpose-driven business leader and helping other businesses adopt that mindset. Mike, thanks for taking the time to join us today. I'm really excited to get into this with you.
Fantastic. Happy to be here.
All right. Well, I gave a brief summary of your background, but I'd love it if you could start by just sharing your story with everyone here. What's led to not only what you're up to today, but who you are and what drives you?
Hey man, happy to do it and grateful for the work you're doing and building this ecosystem. It's so necessary, and I'm happy to be a part of it. When I get an opportunity to talk about my story, I usually begin with the fact that I grew up in Rochester. And I do it because it reflects on kind of the work I'm really passionate about, and that Rochester was driven for so many years by the success of Kodak. And when Kodak, which those of a certain generation would have never thought it would be anywhere but as successful as it was for a century, is really no longer, at least not in its existence when I was growing up. And I've seen how that impacts a community. And it's been a journey now that really influences how I think about businesses' ability to really drive what happens in communities, give people opportunities for change. And early on in my career, I left Rochester, went to the University of Delaware, got a degree in finance, and then began to work in consulting. This is prior to getting an MBA. Really was driven by what it meant to be an entrepreneur. I just saw so many opportunities around technology and its impact on business. I ended up spending some time in California in the Valley and really enjoyed that. Was driven back to business school where I studied entrepreneurial management. And then as you noted, I ended up going to PricewaterhouseCoopers, which was an incredible place to learn about how big businesses operate, how large CEOs think about strategy. But I had an itch to scratch, as they say, and spent then probably the balance of the next 10 years working in startups and doing entrepreneurial activities, and had the good fortune of working at a technology business in search, right when search was taking off. And we were an enterprise search solution, and it was just incredible growth. I ran a global practice. We learned a ton about how technology is going to shape the future. Search technology at the time, people really didn't know where it was going to go, and Google ended up being just a massive player. But I had the good fortune. There was an exit, and I began to think about what I wanted to do with the rest of my career, and then began to see, from our collective work, the B Corp movement taking off, and that became a bit of an inspiration for me. And I had an opportunity to go back and do something really entrepreneurial with a good friend of mine from undergrad. And we founded, as you alluded to, the Organic Food Incubator. And this was also a time where there was a big movement, and still is, and it needs to grow, around food as medicine and our ability to think differently about our food systems and how we can make positive impact. So this was the first incubator, and it's evolved into a contract manufacturer that was focused on making organic food products and supporting other entrepreneurs and getting their products into market. How could we do that? What were all the levers? Incredible journey, really great learning. And in the middle of it, I was exposed to this, and you noted it, amazing organization in Yonkers, New York called Greyston. And the bakery was founded by this really inspirational entrepreneur, Bernie Glassman. And I was recently married. My wife and I said, hey, let's get involved somewhere. And we ended up volunteering at Greyston Bakery. And Greyston was owned by a foundation, a 501c3, what's kind of now referred to as an alternative ownership enterprise. And just a tremendous, again, opportunity getting engaged with things that I really wasn't all that familiar with around workforce models and social justice and how can business drive real change. Over time, there was some need at the bakery for some kind of business expertise, and I saw where I could perhaps really play some influential help, and I approached the board and I said, these are the things we ought to be thinking about at the bakery, and I got an opportunity to take it over. And it was an incredible journey then from that point on around what was business for a force for good. And you and I had the chance then to meet at a conscious capitalism event, became soul brothers immediately. And, that experience is going to shape where my career goes and the work I do now from now until the end, because I just loved it. And the people there and the need to drive change at scale, really is what motivates me. And we can talk plenty more about that if you want to, but what ultimately led me then to take on other opportunities is how can you use the massive amounts of capital to drive change in a scalable market-based solution. And I really got my mind around that and had different models within private equity, some venture strategies. And when I set off to kind of engage on those right around COVID, kind of had some different opportunities that I took advantage of from a consulting standpoint, but also got really re-engaged back at the Organic Food Incubator. And we had been seeing a lot of growth, and it's at that point that I started to focus in on employee ownership and what would a succession model around employee ownership look like for what we had been doing at the Organic Food Incubator. And kind of just fast forwarding, I believe there is tremendous opportunity in and around all that's going on with employee ownership and the massive amounts of wealth transfer that's going to be happening. And from the ecosystem that you're so passionate about around new business and venture, there is a lot of activity around workforce strategies. How do we support upskilling and new models that might be really valuable to people that are looking up to transfer into an employee ownership structure? And then there's unique things going on in private equity and how these transactions can happen. And I've seen some of your work in discussions around ESOPs, terrific model, but there's innovations happening around governance, the hybrid structures that I was so familiar with around the Greyston model and social enterprise. So I'm energized by what's possible, but really feeling we need to act fast, that we take advantage of some of these things in the market. And that's why I'm grateful for your ecosystem building and to be here talking about it.
Well, I'm grateful for just all the incredible work that you're doing and the inspiration it provides me to not only build this ecosystem, but to support great leaders like you. And there's a lot for us to cover here, but let's start with just how to actually drive change at scale, which you said that you're committed to, and I know that's the case. And to set this up, something you and I have talked a lot about is the difference in my mind between taking a top-down versus a bottom-up approach to this. And the reason why Liberty Ventures, when we do our investing, we don't call ourselves an impact investment organization. I don't like that term. I don't like the concept of it, is because I think that's too top-down traditionally. It's about setting certain metrics and telling companies, here are the things that you need to do to make a positive impact in the world. Whereas most of the great innovations to really drive change comes from the entrepreneurs themselves. And so the bottom-up approach, which I like to embrace and we run with at Liberty Ventures, is to find great entrepreneurs and leaders who are going to conceptualize what kind of change should really be driven in the world and better ways of getting there than any venture capital firm or PE fund is going to do in imposing this on businesses. So why don't we talk about that, or at a different approach that you take for driving change at scale?
Yeah, and this is a great topic, and of course, there are many different ways to conceive it or think about it. And as we were talking about it, where in the overlapping Venn diagram of impact investing and conscious business, are they one or are they separate? And I think, I could argue that they're really overlapping, and maybe the elements that you just brought up are where the separation occurs. But, the passion I'm about right now is income inequality in our country is unsustainable and is driving so many changes. And I think business, or so many negative changes in the economy, I think business can be a real solution for that. So yes, I'm focused on how can we drive and address the income inequality that underpins a lot of these issues we have in society. But I want to do it from a business to business. It starts with the workers that are there, and how do you create wealth for them? How do you actually make them successful so each one of them can thrive? And I feel like that's almost the exact same thing that you're thinking about. So while I may have a lens that says, hey, we need to solve for this problem, the work we're doing has so much overlap that I want to believe you're also thinking about the same broad societal or economic issues that you're looking to solve through Liberty Ventures and the work.
100%. It's all about using business to make sure everyone is better off, which it absolutely can be, but sometimes we need to be really intentional about that. So how are you thinking about business as a driver to address income inequality?
Well, for all its success in providing people opportunities to get jobs, and we talk about job quality being so critical, and it is, and living wages are essential. But for us to really drive changes in income inequality, it's going to be asset ownership. And how do we get some kind of asset ownership into the hands of people that need it so that it can be life-changing? And there's various models underway around real estate and different types of assets that we've seen can create real wealth for people. But my driver is around business. And how can we share the upside in these successful businesses that we're a part of with everyone in the organization? And then it naturally just leans to employee ownership structures. And those models can be long-term with retirement plans that are supportive and really allow the employees to participate in the businesses in the long term, but they can also be about profit sharing. Real changes in income on an annual basis when people need the money to be able to make important decisions in their life and kind of lift themselves up. So I'm uber focused on the wealth and kind of employee wealth building aspects of our businesses.
So I think there's so much opportunity in the employee ownership and profit sharing space. And you mentioned early on that we've talked about ESOPs on the podcast a number of times already, but that there are other ways to do employee ownership. What are some of those other models that businesses can consider?
Yeah, and another long-term model that's been had great success in various instances is the worker co-op model. And worker co-ops have had different entities, different structures over time. The one that I'm energized by, and the one that I think has a tremendous amount of opportunity, is what's called an employee ownership trust. And it's really a derivative of something that has been popular in Europe for a century, really, but many, many more companies over there that have embraced this employee ownership trust structure. It's much easier to put into place and much easier to administer over time. And it actually is a model around employee ownership that is focused on the profit sharing component and giving your employees a share of what comes out of the business each year. The other really intriguing aspect is the retiring owner, or whoever the owner is, they don't need to be retiring to transition into an employee ownership trust, can dedicate or allocate a component of their interest to other community-based organizations. So it's almost inherent in how you could create a perpetual purpose trust that you might be able to create a really dynamic social enterprise type model that not only is building wealth with your employees, giving back to the entire organization, but also supporting some community organizations or causes that you're really driven by.
So you've been going deep into these different models, especially recently. For any CEO listening right now who's wants to think through the different models or whether it's even the right decision for them, how can they get started? What would be your recommendation?
There are a handful of really valuable ecosystem building organizations around employee ownership trust, around just employee ownership in general. Transform Finance, little less than a year ago, released an amazing learning hub that covers all sorts of different models and the players in the space. I'd encourage people just to go to that learning hub. There is also a lot of activity worth noting at the very highest ends of corporate transitions, with private equity playing a big role. The major players thinking about how to share wealth across entire organizations, different from what historically PE is known for, which is sharing with just the management. KKR and Pete Stavros have been leading the way. And just recently, Pete did a piece on 60 Minutes. But if you look at a nonprofit that Pete had founded, it's called Ownership Works. I'd encourage people to look into that space. And then some of the other really successful ecosystem building organizations, Project Equity. And there's a organization called Common Trust, which is moving the needle forward on the employee ownership trust model.
So thank you. Those are great resources. And what would be the strongest case you would make for a CEO or an owner to really consider employee ownership?
It's the proverbial win-win-win, right? I mean, you're able to exit. The models developing now are not concessionary in any way. So the owner is able to get back, as they should, value for everything they've built over time. In turn, you're giving back, or you're giving a portion of the business and future earnings to a team that's helped you to build it. And now that team is motivated. So all the elements around employee engagement, reducing turnover, attracting new talent, some of the issues that we were seeing as I've been building different businesses, it's difficult to hire people now, right? That's not going to change. The demographics of our country, there's going to be a limited number of workers. You need ways to attract team members, and employee ownership is a beautiful way to do it. And so now you've addressed ownership and that structure in a winning way. Now you're driving employees and building the type of employee wealth that you'd like to build. And then the third win to me is the community, right? The community is assured that there is a good business operating in their community for the long term. And, from my experience in Rochester and then in Yonkers with Greyston, businesses are critical, right? Keeping our businesses in communities where they've been for years, operating profitably, it's really essential. So all of those elements, I think, for the right-minded business owner, this is a bit of a no-brainer, if you will, that they should move this direction.
And, just to point out, this is something that some of the most successful companies in recent years have embraced from the beginning. It's just standard in Silicon Valley and the tech world for employees to get part ownership and to share in the success of the business. Now, those are companies that have an eye towards IPOing or getting acquired, so pretty clear exit plans, but it applies really to so many other companies to consider. And as you said, is the proverbial win-win-win here.
Totally. And I think there is a good amount of work, exciting, innovative conversations that could be around that. I mean, this model has been what the Valley's built its success on in some ways. Motivating team members to work that extra, whatever it might be, to try to create a successful strategy, and then sharing in that wealth. It's the exact same structure, but now we're thinking about it from how do we deliver that to the middle market, to those employees that might not have asset building opportunities. It's a really incredible time, and I'm grateful that there's a lot of smart thinkers thinking about how these models can evolve.
And you're one of them, which is why I'm really glad that you're doing that. But let's talk a little bit about the Organic Food Incubator and just what you learned from that experience. So can you share a little bit more about how this really came about, the kinds of companies that you supported, and where it's going?
It's a great entrepreneurial journey because there's pivots involved, of course, right? And like any great entrepreneur, you need to pivot to make sure you're making the most of it. But the OFI really began around a brand vision we had for our own products that were like I was mentioning earlier, around food as medicine and how can you address issues around gut health and really create products that are going to be better for us. So we had a kind of range of probiotic products, and we needed additional space to operate in New York City. Space is at a limit. And so we ended up renting a much larger space with a vision for how we would grow into it. Our brand did reasonably well, but not nearly at the pace that we needed it to. So to pivot to try to address some of our issues around capacity, we began to, easiest way to think about it is rent out the additional space. But we did it from the mindset of how can we support other organic-minded entrepreneurs to build their brands in a market where it's really hard to get off the ground. And it turned out that was a successful strategy. And we had quite a level of interest in the space. We ended up renting more space in our original locations in Queens. And the OFI kind of began really focusing on, hey, what is it to support this entrepreneurial ecosystem around changing our food systems? I have to attribute a lot of that success to my co-founder, Michael Schwartz. He is a brilliant chef, food scientist, and his ability to really support entrepreneurs in that space. Like, everybody needs some supports. And the more and more we did that work, we ended up also focused on what's termed contract manufacturing. So people with a vision for what they would like to create, but without the ability to make it or perhaps the interest, would come to the OFI and we'd figure out solutions for them, ending up making more product for them than them doing it themselves. And that business also became quite successful. And so just to cut to the chase, kind of a few different pivots. The business moved from Queens to Bloomfield, New Jersey, into a more of a manufacturing-oriented solution. And now, I'm seeing firsthand what it means to have a really meaningful work in a community where people need it. And Bloomfield is that kind of community. We've got 62 incredibly committed team members. And we're at a point now where we need to think deeply around succession planning. And that's what brought us to employee ownership. And how can we empower the team to allow the OFI to remain successful, to exist in Bloomfield for the next 100 years, to give back to the community. We've got an incredible program with a school that works with the neurodiverse, and we're really passionate about how we can kind of provide back learning and opportunities into our community. So it's been a great journey, and I believe now, like I did then, that there's just real growth and impact that can be had in food, and the team at the OFI is pursuing it.
So I love all of the pivots that you highlighted there, and it sounds like you learned a lot on this entrepreneurial journey. So for the other founders listening right now, what's the number one thing that you've learned from the OFI experience that you think is important for others to know as well?
Have a good partner is one, right? I get approached. I do a fair amount of mentoring, and it's always great to have an aligned partner that is committed to the values that you have, that wants to keep driving it forward. That has never let me down. The other is also somewhat of a entrepreneurial cliche is don't ever stop, right? There are solutions. And even in the darkest days when you're thinking, oh boy, take that next step, get yourself out of bed and think about, okay, these are the calls I need to make to try to solve this problem. And the problems do get solved. And, there was as you noted, a few pivots along the way that said, okay, how do we do this? And we find a way. And no one had been working in this organic co-packing space before we moved into it. And now it's a really great space to be in. But it took an entrepreneurial mindset of we can make this happen. We just have to continue to persevere.
Those are really valuable lessons from your experience. But given that you mentioned that you mentor a lot of startups as well, What are some of the big problems that you typically see them facing and what kind of advice do you give to work through them?
Well, there's all sorts of challenges that new business entrepreneurs are facing. I do a fair amount of work in the social enterprise space and social impact space. My immediate first piece of advice to those looking to make an impact is make sure your business works, right? No margin, no mission. Make sure you're successful and you have a profitable strategy so that you can do the impactful work you want to. Where I find a lot of young entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs in general are overly optimistic about what their target market is. So find your first set of customers and make sure that market is the one that is going to continue to buy whatever it is you're selling. The pace, I'm always working with my mentorship teams around the pace that they think they're going to be able to achieve some change. Because if you set the right pacing, of course, you're setting your own expectations the correct way. And if you're overly optimistic on quickly things will happen, teams can become discouraged or believe they're not successful when in fact they're doing great. They just set some pacing expectations that weren't really realistic.
Everyone is optimistic when they're starting a business, and then you need to be. Otherwise, why would you do this crazy thing, take this huge risk of starting a business? But you have to be realistic to a large extent also in building this in order to make sure you're actually hitting your goals, that you're building this. And what you've just said is also really important, to make sure that team morale is high. No one likes to miss targets. People want to exceed beyond them, and missing them can be really demoralizing.
Yeah, and that's not even in startups. It's across the entire, management strategy, but absolutely.
100%. Okay, so what's coming up for you right now, Mike, that you're most excited about?
Oh, we've touched a lot on it. The optimist in me, and that's the entrepreneurial spirit coming out. Is there may be some solutions to address this income inequality gap. It's going to take really progressive or really proactive activity to make it happen, and it's a long-term journey. Right, that's another interesting aspect around entrepreneurism. We think, hey, next month, next week, but having a long-term idea on how we can really make impact. So I'm driven that this opportunity to use what's termed the Silver Tsunami. We haven't talked about that yet, but that is the massive number of massive number of baby boomers that have been successful in creating small and medium-sized businesses. Estimates around $10 trillion in assets. That's going to be happening over the next 10 to 15 years, that those assets are going to change hands. I'm fired up that there's something new that could really drive value in our communities, could provide opportunities to people to build wealth that they didn't have before. And my continued work is what's that structure? Like, what's going to be the most effective tools at hand that we can create something scalable where you can really drive meaningful change at lots of different businesses in the next 10 to 15 years.
I love that you're working on this, Mike, and I love that we're going to get to work together on doing this going over the next 10 to 15 years. So really, as we wrap this up, I just want to say thank you for being the inspirational leader you are, and for everything that you're doing, and for taking the time to share all of this with the Liberty Ventures community today.
Alexander, I'm so glad you used the we phrase there. I look forward to all our work together in the future. It's going to be fantastic.
Yes, it is.